This Russian man was found on a boat with 2 bodies in the Sea of Okhotsk. This is the terrifying story from the Far East of Russia. On August 4th, 2024, Sergei Pichugin and his 15-year-old son Ilya arrived in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk from Ulan-Ude. They were met by Sergei's brother Mikhail, who lived on Sakhalin Island and often went fishing in the sea. Mikhail invited his brother and nephew on a trip to the Shantar Islands to see untouched nature and maybe even whales, which Ilya had always wanted to see. To prepare, the brothers bought a catamaran-type boat called Baikot 470. They packed it with food and fishing gear. Everything was planned. A week's worth of food, sleeping bags for night on the boat, and fish in the roads. On August 9th, Ilya called his mother, Natalie, and said, "Mom, we've returned from the Shantar Islands. I'm using a satellite phone from a fisherman. We're heading to Sakhalin." This was the last call from Ilya. Later that day, the family set off from Cape Perovsky in Khabarovsk Krai, heading towards the town of Okha in Sakhalin. The distance was about 93 miles, and they expected to reach the shore in a few hours. But something went wrong. That day, their boat engine broke down about 37 miles from the shore. At first, they tried to paddle, but one of the oars broke. Then they lost their anchor and the boat began drifting further out to sea. It's logical. Sailors from other boats are at sea for months seeing the smooth water, and the chance that someone will be looking in the right direction at the right moment is quite small. This is when their nightmare began. They were drifting in the open sea, trying to get Silent's attention. Boats and helicopters passed nearby, but no one saw them. Mikhail and Sergei used signal flares, more than 10 of them, but it was like they were invisible to the world. Their relatives started to worry, but the search didn't start right away. It took several days for rescuers from 3 regions to begin searching. Planes and helicopters were used to scan the coastline, bays, and inlets. Over 2 weeks, they covered more than 77,000 square miles. But they found no trace of the boat or the people. Only Ilya's mother, Natalie, refused to give up hope.
Please, don't stop searching. What if they are still out there waiting for help and we're not looking for them?
She begged. The family never stopped searching on their own. They even turned to psychics because there were no leads. The relatives insisted that the boat couldn't have just sunk, and the men were experienced fishermen and hunters who knew how to survive in the wild. After 2 months, 67 days, the family received a call. A fishing boat found the drifting catamaran about 620 miles from Okha. On board were 2 bodies and 1 very thin man. It was Mikhail, who had miraculously survived, but his weight had dropped from 220 pounds to just 110 pounds. Those 2 bodies were his brother Sergei and nephew Ilya. Mikhail was immediately given first aid. He was wrapped in a blanket and fed broth. He had no appetite and ate very little. The fishermen took him to Magadan, where he rested, and later told his shocking story to the rescuers. During the first weeks, they used up the food they had on board. They had canned food, mostly peas, which they had a lot of. The men tried fishing to survive as long as possible, but hunger and cold began to take their toll. The first person to die on the boat was Ilya. On August 27th, he had celebrated his 16th birthday on the boat. He had almost stopped eating and died of starvation on September 18th. After that, his father, Sergei, lost his mind. He cried, screamed, and even jumped into the water. Mikhail pulled him out, tried to warm him, and begged him to eat, but Sergei refused. 10 days later, Sergei also died. Mikhail said the only thing that kept him going was thinking about his mother and daughter waiting for him at home. To survive, Mikhail collected rainwater and soaked peas, grains, and instant noodles in it. He wore a special winter suit and a sleeping bag made of camel wool, which kept him warm. His feet were always wet though. The air temperature dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water temperature in the Sea of Okhotsk was no higher than 55 degrees Fahrenheit in August and just 39 degrees Fahrenheit in October. Mikhail admitted that he had hallucinations. He heard the voices of his loved ones and the sound of boat engines. Despite this, he didn't lose track of time, counting the days by the position of the sun. He was ready to die. He tied himself to the boat so that his body wouldn't be washed away and his family could bury him. He did the same with the bodies of his brother and nephew. The fishermen found him by accident. The beam of their searchlight happened to land on him while they were scanning the area. At first, Mikhail thought he was hallucinating again, but he still raised his hand and waved weakly. Imagine this, bone-chilling cold. You've been tossed by waves. The wind is howling and the rain is pouring. It's a terrifying situation. A medical expert said that Mikhail survived because of his extra weight. His body went through a process called lipolysis, where fat breaks down and releases water. Because of this, Mikhail didn't suffer from dehydration as badly. The professor said that dehydration is the most dangerous thing in these situations. According to doctors and local fishermen, Mikhail probably could have survived only another week without help. But that's not the end of the story. It turns out that Mikhail's 12-year-old daughter had a strange feeling. This summer, she had been on the island with her father and was supposed to go with them to the Shantar Islands. At the last moment, she asked her mother Ekaterina to buy her a ticket home. She said she didn't want to see their whales or go to the island. Mikhail was against this because everything was already planned, but the daughter refused to stay. So Ekaterina bought her a ticket and sent her to Krasnoyarsk to stay with her aunt. Even though the story is incredibly tragic and everyone feels sorry for the family, Mikhail is being investigated for violating security rules while operating water transport, which led to the death of 2 or more people. The police have already seized the boat and evidence and are conducting an investigation. Legally, he wasn't even allowed to take that boat more than 3 miles from the shore. But let me remind you, the distance they covered was 300 times further, 90 miles. Sergei and Ilya's family don't blame Mikhail for their deaths. They believe their loved ones died because the government services didn't do their jobs properly. Ilya's mother Natalia and her brother kept asking the Ministry of Emergency Situations and the prosecutor's office to continue the search. They asked many times, but they were always told that was no money to pay for the expensive helicopters. It showed that they say it cost tens of thousands of dollars. So in September, they stopped looking. The Pichugin family had no choice but to search by themselves. They drove along the shores of Khabarovsk and Sakhalin, hiring people to help. A few times, the rescuers did search with helicopters, but they didn't let Natalia and her brother go with them. The Pichugins believe that if they had been allowed to fly, they could have seen their loved ones. But the rescuers always say that it's too hard to find such a small boat in the huge ocean, and it wasn't worth continuing the search. When people asked how Mikhail survived, he said, before Mikhail Pichugin, only a few people had managed to survive in the open sea or ocean. In 1942, a 24-year-old Chinese man named Poon Lim was serving as a second steward on the British merchant ship Ben Lomond. In November, during the height of World War II, the ship was spotted by a German submarine, which fired 2 torpedoes. When the attack happened, Poon Lim was on deck, managed to grab a life jacket, and jumped overboard. He spent several hours in the water before finding a wooden raft. On the raft, he discovered a 10-gallon barrel of fresh water, tins of biscuits, sugar, signal flares, and a flashlight. Using the wires from the flashlight, Poon Lim fashioned a fishing hook. He collected rainwater with a tarp, caught fish, and even birds. At one point, when a small shark attacked his raft, Poon Lim killed it with a metal can. Passing ships failed to spot the tiny raft. US Navy planes once spotted him and even dropped a lifebuoy, but a storm broke out and the raft drifted away. Poon Lim spent 133 days on that raft. In the spring of 1943, he was found at the mouth of the Amazon River by 3 Brazilian fishermen. Over those months, he lost only 20 pounds. Whoa! But there is an even more famous story. In January 1982, American yachtman Stephen Callaghan was sailing solo in the Atlantic Ocean in a homemade boat. On the night of February 5th, his vessel collided with a large fish. Luckily, he had a 6-foot life raft. Before the yacht sank, Callaghan managed to transfer supplies, food, water, a harpoon gun, a sleeping bag, navigational maps, a solar water still, and a book about surviving at sea onto the raft. Callaghan found himself in a remote area far from shipping lanes. For the first few days, he sent out distress signals using a radio beacon, but the battery soon died. Callaghan's survival story closely resembles Poon Lim's. He relied on rainwater, caught fish, birds, and even fended off a shark. Though unlike Lim, he didn't kill it, just scared it off. The yachtsman drifted over 2,000 miles. About 10 ships passed him by, but none saw him. On April 20th, 1982, he reached the island of Marie-Galante near Guadeloupe, where local fishermen rescued him. Later, Callaghan wrote a book titled Adrift: 76 Days Lost at Sea. On the one hand, these stories prove that survival is possible in the wild, even in the open ocean. And if you ever decide to embark on a risky journey, at least make sure you have an emergency key just in case. Don't forget to like, write a comment, and see you next time.